So CBC is one of the most commonly asked for investigations, but it's also one of the most underinterpreted investigation, because there's so much we can get from a CBC, and many a times we do not look at it like a complete investigation. So today we're going to see how we can interpret a CBC more effectively. So starting from what's a Coulter counter, um, like Sir and Madam has said in the previous presentation, a Coulter counter is an apparatus which counts the number of particles and determines its size. So this was how it was started. When it started, it only counted the number of particles and the size. But now, of course, there have been many more developments and sophistication. So now we can actually know what is the granularity and many complex such things. So it started by determining only the number of particles and the size. So this is a little brief history. The Coulter principle was actually discovered way back, but it was patented only in the 1950s. And since then, there has been many modifications to it. And now we have the fully automated instruments. So this is the Coulter principle. What is the principle is that it is the resistive pulse sensing or the impedance principles, which means when a cell passes through a zone of electric activity, it causes a change, and this change is sensed by the sensor, and this is interpreted as one cell. And the magnitude of change determines the volume or the size of the cell. So the more the change in the electrical impulse, the bigger is the size of the cell. So this is what I said. So this is the electrical field, and these are the cells which pass through it. When one of the cell passes through it, there's a change in signal, and that is read as one cell. But what we should know here is that for this to be effective, it requires that there's a single line of cell, as in single cell should pass through that electrical zone at a time. If there are two cells which pass this red area at a time, then the sensor is going to count them as one particle. And because the change in magnitude, change in electrical impulse is going to be more, it's going to say that the cell has a bigger size. So this was the principle with which it started. So of course, later they added the optical scatter, the flow cytometry, and with these new principles, we were able to find out what is the granularity and more complex details about the cell. So we've seen what are the types. I think even in the last couple of presentations, we've heard about a 3-part, a 5-part, a 7-part, 9-part. So basically a 3-part differential analyzer is the most simple. This is how it started. So it differentiated the WBCs into 3 parts. One is the neutrophils, the mixed cells, and the lymphocytes. But then came the 5-part analyzer, which means that this mixed population was actually further subdivided or categorized into eosinophils, basophils, and monocytes. So the major difference in principle is that the 3-part analyzer uses only the impedance technique, but whereas the 5-part analyzer uses more advanced principles like flow cytometry, and that's the reason it's able to give the difference between a eosinophil, basophil, and a monocyte. So again, a little more about that. Like I said, a 3-part differential analyzer gives only this, makes out only the cell size, but a 5-part differential analyzer goes more deep into the cell and also finds out more about the cell complexity, the cellular content, the granules, etc. So what are the newer types? The newer types actually give much more than only the lymphocytes. They actually give what is the immature granulocyte count, or IG, and sometimes the immature platelet fraction. The immature platelet fraction is so important in cases of ITP, and the reticulocyte count, and even the nucleated RBCs. So before these analyzers, all these were a peripheral smear diagnosis. We had to actually look into the smear to be able to find out what is the reticulocyte count, or are there nucleated RBCs. But with these modern analyzers, our job is made simple. So next is the histogram. Histogram is nothing but the graphical representation of what the Coulter reads. So it is a graphical representation, and there can be a platelet histogram, an RBC histogram, and a WBC histogram. So in the vertical axis, we have the number. That means more the number, the higher your graph is going to be. And the horizontal axis, it's the size. So we'll come to the platelet or the RBC histogram. So you can see this is the platelet. Of course, the platelets are smaller in size, and that's why they come here. And then we have the RBC histogram. So the RBC histogram actually peaks at around 80 to 100, which is the mean size of the RBCs. And then there can be a WBC histogram. So in the WBC histogram, we can have first comes the lymphocytes, which are the smallest of all the WBCs. Then the mixed cells, which consist of monocytes, basophils, eosinophils, and then we have the neutrophils. So just by looking into the histogram, we can actually make out whether the child has neutrophilia or lymphocytosis. Suppose this peak is more, that means the child has neutrophilia. So a little variation on the histogram. So like I said, so this child has neutrophilia because, as you can see, this peak is much more than the other two. Whereas this child has lymphocytosis because the peak corresponding to the lymphocytes is higher than the other two. So a little about the semi-automated and the fully automated instruments. So like the name says, the semi-automated instruments require a human assistance, like the dilution or reading the sample. And but the disadvantage is that because it is semi-automated and a few steps have to be done by the technician, it takes a long time. So in a busy hospital where there's a lot of CBC samples which come, a semi-automated instrument may not be the best. Whereas the fully automated instruments, all we have to do is feed the sample into the system and it will give us the report. So with this background, we're going to go into a few cases, and irrespective of what the diagnosis is going to be, or irrespective of how what the management is going to be, we're going to concentrate on the CBC because that's the whole purpose of the module. So we'll go ahead with case 1. So this is a 2-year-old girl who on a regular vaccination visit was noticed to be pale by the pediatrician. And the pediatrician had got the CBC done and hemoglobin was 3.7. So further history, the child was appropriate for age in terms of height and weight. The dietary history, the child was predominantly on a milk-based diet. And clinically, the child didn't have organomegaly or lymphadenopathy. So just with the history and examination, we know what the diagnosis is. A child coming at 2 years of age who's appropriate for age in terms of height and weight, which means that it's not a chronic problem. With the diet history, which is predominantly milk-based, we all know that it is an iron deficiency anemia. But we'll look into the CBC. So this is a child who came with a hemoglobin of 3.7. As you can see, the MCV is 50.5 and the MCH is 12.1. The MCHC is not there, but that's also less. So these are very tiny RBCs, so which is typical of a iron deficiency anemia. So further investigation, whenever we read the CBC, it should never be in isolation. We should always read all the 3 cell lines in totality. So the other cell lines were normal here, the total count, the platelet count were normal, and the RDW was increased. What the RDW says is that what we see in a peripheral smear as anisocytosis is represented as increased RDW. And the peripheral smear was, of course, microcytic hypochromic anemia. So we did the ferritin and it was less. So 2 things that I want to tell here is that in a child who comes with typical history and a typical CBC and peripheral smear finding of iron deficiency anemia, how much do we investigate? Of course, we can go ahead and do the total iron binding capacity or the full iron studies, but more often just a ferritin would suffice. And the second thing is, this child came with a hemoglobin of 3.7. Do we transfuse the child or do we just follow up? So this also depends. If the child is stable, if the parents understand the problem, then just by giving iron, we can actually follow up the child. So this is a child with iron deficiency anemia. Going on to the next case. This is a 14-year-old boy who came with easy fatigability for 2 months, decreased appetite for 2 months, and loose stools on and off. So he was pale, there was no icterus, no lymphadenopathy, no organomegaly, but his height was less than the third centile. In contrast to the previous case, this child actually is stunted, which means that he's been having this problem for quite some time. So it is very important to take anthropometry. And you can see his investigations. The hemoglobin is 2.4. The MCV, MCH, and MCHC is again decreased. And the RDW, like the previous case, is increased. So this is also suggestive of iron deficiency anemia. But the difference is that this is an older child and this is a chronic problem. So we should never forget that iron deficiency anemia is more a classic iron deficiency, a nutritional iron deficiency anemia is more common in the growing age group, maybe around 1 year, 2 years. So that's when we can actually follow the child. So this boy definitely requires more investigation because we know that this looks like iron deficiency anemia. So we should go ahead and do the other investigations as well. So the total count is normal. The platelets are also normal. The ferritin is low and the retic count is 1.2. Now a word about the retic count. A retic count of 1.2 on the face value looks normal, but retic count should always be interpreted based on the hemoglobin and the hematocrit. If a child with a hematocrit of 9.6 or 10 has a retic count of 1.2, then this is definitely less. So one should always calculate the corrected retic count. So we'll come to the corrected retic count later and its importance. So we also investigated him as to see if he's losing blood somewhere. And we also did the anti-TTG IgA for celiac disease, and this was positive. So this is a child who has iron deficiency, yes, but this is a secondary cause of iron deficiency, and this child actually had celiac disease. So we got a gastroenterologist opinion, and a SCOPY was planned. Ideally, we could do a biopsy, but because the parents were not willing, just based on the antibody level, we diagnosed him as celiac disease. And on follow-up, as you can see, he's doing brilliantly. His hemoglobin has almost come up to normal. It's normal, it's 14.4. So what I wanted to convey with this is that if you find a child with CBC, which is suggestive of iron deficiency anemia, secondary causes of anemia should definitely be thought of, especially if the history is not very classical of a typical iron deficiency anemia. So secondary causes can be bleeding, it can be polyps, it can be epistaxis or malabsorption like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, or celiac disease like in our case. So a word about the corrected retic count. So the retic count actually is a percentage, which means it is always relative to our RBC or the hematocrit. So in a child with anemia, when a hematocrit itself is less, even a seemingly normal retic count will be low. So this is there are many formulas to calculate the corrected retic count, and this is the most simple. So once we calculate the corrected retic count, then we have to interpret the retic count. So it is the retic percentage into the hematocrit and divided by the normal hematocrit into 0.5. The normal hematocrit is usually taken as 45, And this 0.5 is actually a maturation factor. So there are different formulas which give different maturation factor based on the hematocrit. Suppose the hematocrit is less than 10, then it becomes 2.5. So there are different maturation factor, but this is the most simple of it. So with that note on the retic count, we'll go to the third case. This is a 6-month-old boy who was brought because he was not gaining weight. And this child was exclusively breastfed. On examination, he was irritable, he was pale, and he had hyperpigmentation of the hands and legs. So these are his investigation. So he was anemic. You can see the indices. He had macrocytic anemia, and his total count is also on the lower side, and his platelets are also low. So he has pancytopenia, a borderline total count, but all 3 cell lines are affected. But if you see the RDW, it is elevated. It's 20.1. So what would be a diagnosis at this stage? So we'll see. So his serum bilirubin was elevated with the indirect fraction more than the direct, which means there is some amount of hemolysis. His retic count was again 1.3, but if we calculate it for the hemoglobin and the hematocrit, it will still be low. Vitamin B12 levels were low. And we did the mother's vitamin B12 as well, and she was also vitamin B12 deficient. So the point I want to stress here is that any anemia which comes with MCV on the higher side, even if the other cell lines are involved, vitamin B12 has to be thought of, because vitamin B12 can suppress all 3 cell lines. So Perfill Smear, of course, showed hypersegmented neutrophils, and this was megaloblastic anemia. So we'll move on to case 4. This is a 5-month-old boy who came with progressive abdominal distension, and he was born out of a consanguineous marriage. He was pale, he had hepatosplenomegaly and low lymph nodes. So you can see his hemoglobin was only 3, and his indices were a little on the lower side, but his total count was 56,000 with lymphocytic predominance, and platelets were normal. So anemia and high total count with the lymphocytic predominance, hepatosplenomegaly, could this be leukemia? The first thing that comes to our mind is, could this be leukemia? It could be leukemia, but before that, we'll have to go more into the detail. Like Perfill Smear, it showed nucleated RBCs, which means the nucleated RBCs have been, the counter counts the nucleated RBCs as lymphocytes, because the nucleated RBCs are are bigger in size. So the counter counts it as lymphocytes. So that's why we get a high total count. And LFT showed indirect hyperbilirubinemia. So we did the electrophoresis because this child was born out of a consanguineous marriage. It was a typical age group. There were nucleated RBCs. So electrophoresis confirmed a diagnosis of thalassemia major. So the point I want to stress here is that whenever you see a high total count, especially with lymphocytic predominance, you have to keep in mind that, of course, it can be leukemia. We will have to rule out leukemia, but there is also a chance that it can be nucleated RBCs, which are giving rise to this increased total count. So a word or two about nucleated RBCs. There are newer Coulter counters which actually give us the percentage of nucleated RBCs. So these are actually immature RBCs which haven't lost their nucleus yet. It is important to know that sometimes they can be seen in the neonatal period. Other than the neonatal period, whenever there is a stress to the bone marrow, we can see nucleated RBCs. So we'll move on to the next case. This is a 10-year-old boy who was referred for jaundice. He had history of jaundice on and off since birth. He was treated for neonatal hyperbilirubinemia, and then he was diagnosed as viral hepatitis. So there have been on and off episodes of jaundice. And the father also had jaundice in his childhood. So on examination, he was icteric, he had splenomegaly, no hepatomegaly, and no lymph nodes. So these were his investigation. He was anemic with MCV of 79, which is okay. The indices were okay. But if you look closely at the MCHC, it is elevated. It is 40, which is much more than what usually it is. And the total count and RDW are normal. So when we look at the smear, we could actually see spherocytes. So even in the previous presentation, there was a lot of doubts regarding RDW and especially in spherocytosis. So in spherocytosis, the RDW is normal because there's no variation in size as such. The RBCs are smaller, yes, but there's no variation in size. So that's why the RDW is typically normal in hereditary spherocytosis. So we went ahead and did the 5 EMA, which was suggestive of hereditary spherocytosis. A word about 5 EMA, it is eosin 5 maleimide. This is actually a flow cytometric test where we see how much of the dye binds to the protein on the RBC surface, that is onto the BAN3 molecule. So whenever it is less, it is hereditary spherocytosis. And also a word about RDW. Like I said, it is the coefficient of variation in the red cell volume distribution. So what we see as anisocytosis in the peripheral smear is seen as increased RDW in the Coulter counter. So there are two types of RDW. This is one of the questions that people usually ask. Any report that you see, there are two types of RDW. One is the RDW coefficient variation, and the other is the standard deviation. What we generally use is the RDW CV because this takes MCV into account. And this RDW SD is actually what is the variation at 20%. So what we generally use is RDW CV. So this is a table which shows the relation between RDW and MCV. Most often there's a confusion when there's a thalassemia trait because thalassemia trait and iron deficiency anemia have almost the same CBC reading. So if the MCV is low and the RDW is normal, that means it's most likely to be a thalassemia trait because in an iron deficiency anemia, the RDW is going to be high. And any nutritional deficiency, the RDW will typically be high. If MCV is low, then it is iron deficiency anemia. If MCV is high, then it is vitamin B12 or folic acid. So remembering this table makes a lot of things easier. So this is, we'll go to the next case. This is a 10-month-old child who had fever for 5 days, cough plus or minus for almost a week and was partially immunized. Clinically, child was not pale, there was no lymphadenopathy, liver and spleen were just palpable, chest was clear and other systems were normal. So what did the investigation show? Child was not anemic, but the total count was extremely high and the platelets were normal. So any child coming with a total count of 70,000 and a lymphocytic predominance, leukemia is very high on our differential diagnosis. But still, we have to remember certain conditions which can cause increase in total count and which may not be malignancy. So you can actually see the peripheral smear and the bone marrow aspiration and biopsy showed no atypical cells and all the precursors were within normal limits. So what is causing this high total count in this child? So because there was a history of cough, the child was partially immunized. We went ahead and did the PCR for pertussis and it was positive. So this child actually had lymphocytosis secondary to pertussis. And why does pertussis cause lymphocytosis? It is known that the pertussis toxin actually causes increased production of lymphocytes 1. And it also causes the lymphocytes to stay in the blood vessel. So that causes lymphocytosis. So this was lymphocytosis secondary to pertussis. Just by treating the pertussis alone, the lymphocytosis came back to normal. But in such cases, it is very important to rule out malignancy, because even though the pertussis is positive, there is a cause. We shouldn't miss a case of malignancy. So that's why the bone marrow aspiration and biopsy was done. So we'll come to the next case. This is a one-year-old boy who had decreased activity for 1 month and reddish spots on the lower limbs for 15 days. And on examination, he was pale, he had petechial spots, cervical lymph nodes were present, and he also had hepatosplenomegaly. So just by this, a 1 month history, petechial spots, cervical lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly, we know that this can be something more serious. So we went ahead and did the investigation. The hemoglobin was 6.8, which is low. He was anemic. The total count was 6,700. What is important here again is that it is lymphocytic predominance and platelets were low. So this child had anemia, thrombocytopenia, and a normal total count, but his peripheral smear showed atypical cells. So what I want to stress here is that malignancy need not always come with a high total count. It can come even with a low total count. So if there is lymphocytic predominance, then it's very important that we see the peripheral smear and we identify the blasts if they are. So we went ahead, did the bone marrow aspiration and biopsy, and as you can see, there were blasts around 55 to 60%. So this was a child with acute leukemia. So the next case, here's an 8-year-old boy who came with history of petechial spots, and there was history of sibling death. The parents couldn't explain what was the cause of the death. And on examination, he was pale, he had petechial spots over the lower limbs, he had no organomegaly, and he had no lymphadenopathy. So you can see the investigations, the hemoglobin is actually 1.6, which is so low. And as you can see, the MCV is 121.5, which is much higher than the normal limits. And the platelets are also low, and the total count is also low. So here is a child who's presented to us with pancytopenia, with no organomegaly, and with a history of sibling death. So in such cases, it is very important for us to remember that many of the genetic diseases can come with such history: sibling death, no organomegaly, and as you can see, the MCV is high. Any of the bone marrow failure syndromes, the MCV is going to be high. That is one of the clue from the CBC that that we can say that this might be a inherited bone marrow failure syndrome. So this child has pancytopenia, a high MCV. This child is also has neutropenia. So we did the retic count, which is 1. Even without calculating the corrected retic count, one can say that a retic count of 1 for a hemoglobin of 1.6 is extremely low, which means the bone marrow is not producing any RBCs, and this is most likely to be a case of inherited bone marrow failure syndrome. So we did the bone marrow aspiration and biopsy, which confirmed a hypocellular marrow. And then we went ahead, did the chromosomal breakage analysis, and that was positive. So this child actually turned out to be a Fanconi's anemia. So one take-home message from this case is that a very high MCV in a child with pancytopenia, yes, there can be vitamin B12 deficiency as well, but with a history like this, an inherited bone marrow failure syndrome has to be strongly suspected. So this is the next case, a 7-month-old boy who came with recurrent cough for 2 months, had recurrent oral thrush, had loose stools, and was not gaining weight for the last 1 month. He was apparently gaining weight for the first couple of months, but then the mother noticed that over the last 1 or 2 months, his weight has been static, or rather has been decreasing. So the birth weight was 2.5 kilos. At 4 months, he was 5, but at 6 months, he's starting to lose weight. So he's on admission, he was 4.5 kilos. On examination, he was pale, had oral thrush, spleen tip was palpable, and his weight was less than the third centile, and length was also less than the third centile. So this means that there has been something going on in the background which we're yet to find out what it is. So we did the investigations. His hemoglobin was 10. He was mildly anemic, not that much, I would say. His indices are on the lower side. His MCV is 58, MCH is 18, MCHC is 31. His platelets are 9.45 lakhs. So he definitely has increased platelets. And his WBCs also seem okay. So it's 11,590. But what we have to observe here is not only the WBC count, but also the percentage of neutrophils and lymphocytes. So you can see that the neutrophils are 93% and the lymphocytes are only 7%. So does this mean that this child has a sort of infection which is causing neutrophilia? Or should we concentrate more on the lymphopenia, which is there, which is only 7%? So in this child who's almost 6 months, who's come with recurrent episodes of infection, this lymphopenia becomes significant. But if you see at the hemoglobin and the indices, this child can have iron deficiency anemia again. The indices are low, the platelets are increased. It could be reactive thrombocytosis, but one should never ignore this lymphocytopenia. So our differential diagnosis for this child should definitely include a primary immunodeficiency. So we did the flow cytometry, and as you can see, this is the B cell, which is normal, but the T helper cells, the T cells are actually 0, and the NK cell is positive. So this child is actually a child with severe combined immunodeficiency, a T negative, B positive, and an NK cell positive SCID. So the take home message from this child is that always look at the neutrophil percentage and the lymphocyte percentage. Any child who is lymphopenic, definitely a primary immunodeficiency has to be suspected. So this was a child with SCID. So we'll come to the 10th case. This is a 10-year-old girl who came with hematuria for 2 weeks. It was on and off, but there was no other bleeding manifestations. There were no skin bleeds, no GI bleeds. There was no previous history. Clinically, there was no organomegaly, no lymphadenopathy, mild pallor, but she had mucosal bleeds and vitals were normal. So these are the investigations. She was anemic. Platelets were extremely low. It was only 9,000 and the total count was 9,300. So any child coming with hematuria, obviously our first differential diagnosis would definitely be infection, UTI, and so on. So we went ahead and did all the investigation to rule out, and all the investigations were negative. So in a child who's come with bleeding manifestation, mucosal bleeds with low platelets and the other cell lines being normal, definitely ITP is a diagnosis. And this child, we worked her up for ITP, and this child turned out to be an ITP. Her ANA was 1+, and this child was treated as ITP. So the take-home message here is that hematuria is not very common in ITP. Children usually come with skin bleeds. So when you see hematuria, it is important to look at the CBC closely to see if other cell lines are involved, to do the coagulation tests to see if there are any bleeding disorders. And then if it is ITP, definitely child received steroids and she improved. So this is the next case that we have. This is a 12-year-old girl who came with skin rashes or reddish spots all over the body, and she also had bilateral lower limb pain. So on examination, there was no pallor, she had purpuric and peticule spots, and there was no organomegaly. So these were her investigation. The hemoglobin was 11.6. She was not anemic. I mean, she was borderline. Her total count was normal. There was normal differentials. And then the platelets were again 8,000. So this is again a child with thrombocytopenia. But as you can see, the ANA was 2 plus here. So when a child comes with ITP, or when a child comes with low platelets and we are suspecting ITP, we should always remember the secondary causes of ITP. So we worked her up for SLE, which was normal, because she was a 12-year-old girl, not the usual age group for ITP. SLE workup was normal. So she received steroids and IVIG. This girl also went on to have hematuria, but we managed to discharge her with a platelet count of 91,000. So a word about immature platelet fraction, or IPF here. So IPF is like reticulocyte count. What reticulocyte count is to your RBCs, IPF, for the immature platelet fraction, is to platelets. In a child with ITP, if we do immature platelet fraction and we find that the immature platelet fraction is high, then we can be assured that within the next 24 to 48 hours, the platelet count is going to improve. So it's actually a good way of monitoring of anticipating what the platelet count is going to be in the next couple of days. So this child's IPF was also okay, and her platelets improved to 91,000 and she was discharged, but she came back with hemoptysis and chest pain, which is so unlikely in a child with ITP. So we did the D-dimer, it was elevated. We worked the child up for antiphospholipid antibody, and the lupus anticoagulant was positive. So this child was actually antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, or the APS syndrome. So two things that I want to tell here is that any child comes with thrombocytopenia. If it is a typical age group, typical findings, then definitely we can make a diagnosis of ITP. Definitely do a bone marrow before giving steroids. In case for some reason we are not able to do a bone marrow, then IVIG is a safe choice. And in any child who comes with thrombocytopenia who is outside the typical age group, or if we find any atypical features, then we always have to look forward to look out for secondary causes, because many a times, many diseases present with thrombocytopenia, and which may actually manifest later, like in this child. So this is my take-home message. In a child with anemia, yes, iron deficiency anemia is most common. If it is the typical age group, then we don't have to do a lot of investigation. We can treat the child with oral iron, but always have secondary causes of anemia in your mind, especially if there's a chronic history, if the age group is outside the normal. And always calculate the corrected retic count, because the normal retic count may seem normal, whereas the corrected retic count can actually be very low, and this gives an idea as to how the bone marrow is functioning. And in children with lymphopenia, very important to have primary immunodeficiencies as one of our differential diagnoses. Many a times children with primary immunodeficiencies are missed because we overlook that the child is having lymphopenia. And whenever there is a child with ITP and there are atypical findings, close follow-up is needed, clinically definitely, and also with immature platelet fraction. So I think I'll end my talk here. Thank you everybody for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Sashi.
Yeah.
There are a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Many have been answered by Parni Raman sir and Janani madam. There is one question which it says, how far the Coulter counter, am I audible?
Yeah.
How far the Coulter counter count and manual count correlate? If there are discrepancies, what are the reasons?
So most often the Coulter counter and the manual reading correlate. But when there are red flags, it's always better to correlate and confirm with the peripheral smear. But many a times it correlates. But in terms, if there are platelet clumps or if there are giant platelets, then the Coulter takes them as lymphocytes. So during those circumstances, we can have a little different Coulter reading. But whenever there is a red flag, it is always a good practice to see the peripheral smear.
Right. And there is a question raised about IPF.
Yeah.
IPF is all that means megakaryocytes?
No, immature platelet fraction is, you can't call them megakaryocytes, but they're not yet mature platelets. So they are platelets which are pushed into circulation because of the need. So they're not megakaryocytes, but in a normal circumstances, these platelets wouldn't have been in circulation. So these are still immature because there's a need, the platelet count is low, the body is being pushed, the immature platelets come out into circulation.
And there is one more question which has been answered. Does it mean 3-part Coulter counter, we won't be able to get platelet?
Platelets will be able to get. I mean, the difference between 3-part and 5-part Coulter counter is mostly in the total count, that is the differential count. It gives the lymphocytes, the neutrophils, and the mixed cells, whereas the 5-part Coulter counter actually separates the mixed population into eosinophils, monocytes, and so on. But the RBC and the platelets remain the same.
Yes, that's about it. All questions are answered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shashi. I think it was a very lucid presentation with clear case scenarios, and I think you have done justice to the topic. And especially, like our senior professor has mentioned in the chat box, that cassata was served with almonds and pistas. Very, very nice.
Thank you so much.
And this juncture, I would like to have a comment from Dr. Srinivasan, sir. You would like to have any comments, sir? Professor Dr. Srinivasan?
Yeah. So
yes.
It's very good. So excellent cases selection and representative of important areas which can be missed. And I'm thankful to Janani for waking up so early and being present. Okay. And then Parni Raman is an expert now. He is sought after a person in this particular area. So thank you, Dr. Ismail, for arranging this. And I learned a lot, so I'm sure many others would also become wiser after listening to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Dr. Parni Raman, your comments, please.
Thank you, dear Dr. Shashi. It was a really wonderful and different perspective from the hematologist point of view. Really, we learned a lot. Thanks a lot. Particularly how the hematologist looks at the CBC, but it comes to the anemia and particularly thrombocytopenia, as well as the alteration in the WBC count. Really, it was again a wonderful, enlightening talk. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Parni Raman is the final authority now.
Sir,
and we do feel really happy that Dr. Janani Shankar from US, she's really attending all the meets from US, not missing any CMEs or any other meeting conducted by AAP. Madam, your comments, please, ma'am.
Yeah, it was very nice. I think Tashi Ranjani, I've seen her as a student. I'm very happy to see her doing so well.
Yeah.
When I looked at the name, I thought it was you, but today when I saw your picture, I confirmed it. It's really nice, Tashi Ranjani. Very, very nice cases, very crisp, clear messages. I'm happy that the second line has been created and we don't have to worry about it. Thank you.
I'd like to say
Very,
Ma'am,
very nice,
add
Sashi.
something?
Sashi, keep it up.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, we've attended your classes as students, and
Yeah, I know,
we've
I know.
learned
I've
so
seen
much
you.
from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say, Srinivasan sir, that you may not remember, sir, but in one of the IAP state conferences, where I was presenting a case, you were one of the judges. So we've always looked up to all of you and learned a lot from you.
So nice of it. I think world is so small now. Dr. Jalil Ahmed, I think EB member. You can make some comments on this lecture today.
Thank you, Ismail. It was a wonderful, nice presentation. ஒரு இட்லியே வித்தியாசமா சட்னி சாம்பார் மாதிரி 3 செஷன்ல கொடுத்துட்டீங்க. ரொம்ப ரொம்ப அருமையா. அடுத்து 3 பேருமே 3 வியூ சொன்னாங்க. ஃபர்ஸ்ட் பிக் பாஸ் பழனிராமன் எக்ஸலன்ட், அவர் டாப். நெக்ஸ்ட் மேடம் வந்து இன்டென்சிவிஸ்ட் வியூல போனாங்க. நவ் தி ஸ்பெஷாலிட்டி. நெக்ஸ்ட் ஐ திங்க் தே வில் கிவ் பிரியாணின்னு நினைக்கிறேன்.
வெயில் காலத்துல குளிரா பண்றீங்க. ஆனா இதுல கோவிட் வந்து குளிரா சாப்பிட கூடாதுங்கிறாங்க.
அதனால ஹாட்டா அடுத்த டாபிக்ஸ் அடுத்த ஜோன்ல உள்ளவங்க ஐ திங்க் மதுரைன்னு நினைக்கிறேன்.
Yes, Madurai.
வந்துருவாங்கன்னு நினைக்கிறேன்.
Fauzia, Dr. Shanmugh Sundaram is there, Fauzia?
இல்ல sir.
Illa, I think he's supposed to talk on the next time. Okay, we'll just contact him over the phone. Okay, anyhow, thank you, Fauzia, for all, moderating in such a good way. I think your final comments, Fauzia, and you can close the session.
I would like to thank Dr. Shashi Ranjani for giving an elaborate presentation on the Coulter mechanism to make us understand what the report, how to interpret the report. And on behalf of TNSC, I would like to thank her for giving this very lucid presentation. Thank you, Dr. Shashi. And thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity to moderate this session.
Thank you.